Okay.
Hi, this is Mark Arnold from Fun Ideas Podcast, and we have another new episode that's about the film director Ed Wood. And before I introduce our guest, the first one was about Ed's writing of sports articles, which was really odd and interesting. And then the second podcast I did about Ed was a person who knew Ed personally and wrote the equivalent of his autobiography. So today we have writer Jim Pontolillo, and he's here to talk about Ed Wood in yet another way. So we will find out in the next few minutes. All right, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Okay, so yes, we are talking Ed Wood, and tell us a little bit about yourself, about your book, and what aspect of Ed Wood's career or life that you go into it.
So I think like a lot of people, I was drawn to Ed Wood by the Medved brothers back in the late 70s, very early 80s when their Golden Turkey books came out and other things. And of course, it was like, well, gosh, of course I have to see the movie made by the worst director in the world, you know?
Right.
So I hunted Ed's movies down, and the shocking thing was that when I watched Plan 9, I realized I'd seen it before as a kid. But of course, at that point, I had no idea who Ed Wood was, and so it was that was sort of a fun surprise that like, oh, I've already seen one. And of course, Ed wasn't the worst director in the world, but that tagline certainly got him plenty of attention. Um, so, I began over the years just hunting his movies down out of interest. And then as I came to know more about him and his extensive writing career, my interest really shifted into his writing career more than anything else. And then in about the last um, decade, after reading Nightmare of Ecstasy, which, as good as it is, has the limitations of an oral history.
hmm
I've always been interested in researching and writing on a variety of historical topics and things. So I decided I was going to turn my skills towards trying to nail down some more details about Ed's life.
hmm
Um, and 7 years ago was when my first book. Oh, yeah, maybe if we get this in.
Hold it towards yourself, like near your chest if you can, that'll probably,
There
there we
we
go. Oops,
well,
okay, what's the name of it? Go ahead.
regardless, 7 years ago, my first book came out, which was called The Unknown War of Ed Wood Jr., 1942 to 46.
Mhm,
I Since Ed was in the Marines, his full military record actually survives. Most of the Army World War II records were destroyed in a big fire in the 70s. But Ed's complete military record with the Marines still exists, so I got a copy of that from the National Archives and did a bunch of deciphering, wrote this book, which, when I set off on the journey, I was expecting to at least find something somewhat closely resembling many of the stories that we know about Ed in the Pacific, and it didn't quite turn out that way. Still an interesting story nonetheless, but um, he, well, he curated the events of his life in a fashion to make his life more interesting. Let's put it that way.
mhm,
Um, so that book really ended right at the end of his service with the Marines. And really, the next period of his life, from when he leaves the Marines till he finally washes up in Hollywood, has a lot of question marks about it. It's one of the least documented parts of his life. So I then spent several years really pounding on this period of 1946 to 48.
mhm.
Um, let's see if can we even get this in focus. My camera, I'm in focus. This is weird.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I think it's when you blur the background, it likes to blur everything else, which is fine. Uh,
anyway,
so much for visuals. This is an
you
audio podcast. Go ahead.
so my second book came out just about a month, 6 weeks ago, The Muddled Years of Edward D. Wood Jr., 1946 to 48.
Mhm,
And in that I take him as he's leaving the Marine Corps in California in May of 1946, travels back to Poughkeepsie, spends from late May of 46 to late January of 47 in Poughkeepsie, and by his own accounts, being a cross-dressing entertainer in New York City and in clubs in upstate New York. To then in late January 1947, he traveled down to Washington, D.C., where he attended a term at the Kingsmith School of Creative Arts
Hmm.
in their drama program and that's through mid-June of 47.
Hmm.
And again, he uh, had some accounts of, again, being a cross-dressing entertainer at the clubs in Washington, D.C. And then we hit a little bit of there was the the anal retentive in me does not like gaps.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I came across a couple of month gap that I just could not resolve with any definitive info from the in Ed's Hollywood rat race. He makes reference to the fact that he arrived in Hollywood before Thanksgiving of 1947.
Mm.
So, and then in my book, I talk about some subsequent newspaper evidence that would seem to indicate that he was in Hollywood by probably around mid-September 47 at the latest. So we have this gap from about mid-June to mid-September 47, where we're not exactly sure what he was doing. Now, one of the tales he told over the years was that he spent some time with a circus.
Hmm.
And so I provide some documentation showing that that might be accurate because when he was in DC, there was a large, carnival. I said circus, I meant carnival. There was a large
Okay.
carnival, truck-based carnival that was running up and down the East Coast and was in DC when he was there and then was later in Poughkeepsie that summer. So he had an opportunity to cross paths with that carnival several times. So it might well be that he filled in that summer period with his carnival adventures that he talked about and later drew on for writing novels. And and then from that point, I take him through Hollywood and that first year he's there, 1948, providing documentation of what he was up to in that period. So that's really what the book is trying to fill in that that period when he transitioned to Hollywood. And really, after 1949, we start to have much better documentation as to
Right.
what he was up to.
Right. In your research, was there anything during his Marine years or even before, that even hinted at him working on films, or is that just something he kind of fell into when he got to Hollywood?
Well, when he left the Marines, there's a discharge form he had to fill out, and in that there's a little section where you can provide a narrative of what your post Marine Corps plans are. And he said he wanted to go to Hollywood and become a writer and a filmmaker. So that
Yeah.
was certainly, that's May of 1946 we're talking about. So that was certainly set in his mind already.
Hmm.
Um, Another thing I would just add in at the time that I did the book on his World War II service, there was there was a little bit of information in his Marine records that I didn't quite realize the meaning of. Let's put it that way. And I've subsequently realized um, it appears that Ed actually left high school a little bit early in 1941, and there were some accounts back in the 80s without any detail of any sort saying that he had gone to college in Philadelphia.
Hmm.
And there is some evidence in his Marine records of post high school business school classes.
Hmm.
So, and and also some indications that he may have gone down to Philadelphia to a business school for perhaps half a year or a year, and then when the war broke out, came back up to Poughkeepsie, worked a little at the local theaters, and then finally convinced his parents, since he was underage, to sign the forms to allow him to join the Marine Corps, despite
Okay.
the fact that he was only 17 at the time.
Okay, so he volunteered. He was not drafted or
Oh,
anything.
yes, yes. So, and that's the thing. Even if post-war Eddie created a bit of a fictional, romanticized version of his time in the Marine Corps, he volunteered.
Mm,
So and went off to war.
hmm
Um, so certainly that was no little thing to do,
Right.
um, especially at his age.
hmm where was he stationed? Just out of curiosity.
So
Uh,
he was sent down to Camp Lejeune
hmm
for his training, and then and at that time they would cycle you up to Quantico in Virginia for some of your training beyond basic. And then after that, his unit was shipped to the Los Angeles area. The name of the fort's escaping me. There was a large facility that you got your basic training in the East, and then you were shipped to California and you got some very um, jungle specific Pacific theater specific training right before you were put on troop ships to be sent wherever you were going out in the Pacific. Now he was first shipped to American Samoa, which was a big staging area for U.S. troops to other parts of the Pacific theater.
hmm
Um, and then after that, he served. He was with what was called a Marine Corps Defense Battalion. It was not an offensive unit. It was um, after I hate to say it this way, but after the fighting Marines, say, took a place, if it was determined that that needed to be held as a base for whatever reason, there were then these Marine Corps defense battalions that would come in and do static duty defending the airfields there, and whatever other facilities were there. So he was spent a bunch of time with both the Second and the Seventh Marine Corps Defense Battalions on a bunch of different fairly desolate uh, atolls,
hmm
and probably where he got his worst view of the war was my my brain is going now.
It's okay.
I'm just going to quick catch a date
That's fine.
because my brain is you know
That's what the books are for. People ask me all the
yes
time. When I
it's
write my books, they go, "Don't you remember off the top of your head?" No, that's why I put it down in the book so I could look it
yeah,
up.
sad to say. So in late November 43, as part of a big U.S. offensive,
Mhm,
uh, the Marines landed on Tarawa, and there was just horrific fighting there.
mhm,
And um, and it took them about 3 days to wipe out the Japanese. It was one of the bloodier battles of the Pacific.
mhm,
And then at the end of day three, Ed's unit was actually landed on Tarawa. Um, and the surviving Marines that fought there, most of them got off the island. So Ed actually saw a period. There were a few Japanese stragglers left that fought to the death. Um, Probably worse than anything else Ed had to face. Undoubtedly, he had to help with the cleanup of thousands of dead bodies rotting in the equatorial sun.
mm,
Um, so it was a fair Tara was a horrific place after the battle. Even a month or two later, the troops that were stationed there, when they would come off of the island and onto Navy transports, everyone would have to strip nude on deck so all their
mm,
clothing could be burned because it just reeked of dead bodies still,
mm,
even though they would all, it was just a really um, horrific experience even after the battle. You didn't have to be involved in the fighting, which was, you know, terrible enough. Just to be there afterwards, it was a fairly horrific place to be stationed.
mm.
Uh,
Now, by the end of the war, did he get any promotions or anything like that? I don't know very little about his military career,
so,
just other
so,
than he was in the Marines. That's all I know. Yeah.
so the general arc of his career was sort of mixed. Um, when he was still, excuse me, this seasonal stuff. When he was still in North Carolina before his unit got shipped to California and head out to the Pacific. Eddie went AWOL.
Mm.
Couldn't find any evidence where he went to, but it was right around Christmas. So the assumption would be that he realized he was being sent off for who knows how long, and he went AWOL and went back to Poughkeepsie to see his folks.
Hmm.
Um, when he returned to his unit, he was court-martialed and spent several days in the brig and had to pay a fine. And I mention that because that had a bit of a tail later in his military career of delaying a promotion that he was supposed to get.
Okay.
So ultimately, he started as a private. Ultimately, he ended up as a corporal. He did progress a little bit. He got very good ratings from all his immediate superior officers. He was largely part of the head what was called the headquarters and service company staff pool.
Hmm.
In fact, one of Ed's promotions, you can see in the note at the bottom of the letter that he actually typed up his own promotion for his commanding officer to sign.
Hmm.
There's these little interoffice notes,
Right.
where you can see who the typist was, and so in that case, he typed up his own promotion.
Interesting.
Um, so yeah, the other thing that happened to him of substance in the Pacific was from the time he was American Samoa before he experienced anything else out in the Pacific, um, he became infected with elephantiasis, which was very common in Samoa.
Hmm.
So partway through, before actually, as he was being shipped back to Honolulu, he started to have symptoms of the illness. And that was something that it didn't get you out of the military, but it made you um, exempt from further service in the Pacific because they had found that if you got infected with it repeatedly, it was a much, much worse disease. So
Hmm.
as soon as any soldiers showed signs of having gotten a first infection,
Hmm.
they would be rotated back to California and just do some sort of static duty there, helping with the stateside end of the war. And that's what happened with Eddie. By 40, he spent 44 through, May of 46, basically at several different bases in the LA basin,
Okay.
um, helping with the stateside effort because he was now ineligible to be sent back out
Okay. So,
to the
because that was
South.
my next question, where was he? But this explains it, during like the atomic bomb drops and BJ Day and everything like that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. He became quite sick initially by the time he got to Honolulu and then got to California. He was sent to a special hospital for elephantiasis cases to get treated and for it to subside. It
mm,
never goes away. It's sort of always in your system
right.
and can re-express itself
Mm,
if you become ill or stressed or things like that. So once it calmed down, he then basically sort of had light office duty for the remainder of the war
hmm.
uh, um, on Terminal Island and other places where there were marine facilities.
Hmm. Now, you'd already mentioned that he was stationed in LA there. Um, but you said that he went back to New York after the war and then he went back. So he kept zigzagging back and forth. Why didn't he just stay in LA? Or do you know any
He,
answers on that?
yeah, no, we don't really know. We just know that um, by before the end of May, there's about a 4 or 5 day. When he got back to Poughkeepsie, um, at that time, even though he had done service in the Marine Corps, he was still eligible to be drafted.
Hmm.
So after he left the Marines, he, returned several days later to Poughkeepsie in late May, and he registered with the draft board in Poughkeepsie. So that's how we know roughly when he arrived back in Poughkeepsie.
Hmm.
Um, and like I said, then he spent from May until late May 46 to late January 47 in Poughkeepsie.
Hmm.
Couldn't really find any indications of what he did for employment. He was involved with the VFW and a group called the Marine Corps League
Hmm.
in Poughkeepsie and in New York and became an officer of the Marine Corps League and went to their national convention in Atlantic City later that year in 46. And by his own accounts, he was doing entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
He said he was doing cross-dressing entertaining. We found evidence of him at a place called the Dells Inn, uh, and we can speculate what the nature of his act was because he's billed as the man of 1,000 faces.
So what does
So
that entail? I mean, what can you describe his act then? I mean, what was he
now
doing?
there's really no
Oh,
information about that.
okay.
He did about a month-long stint there, including as the MC of their New Year's Eve show.
Okay.
Um, and that's about all we know.
Okay.
Um, like I said, don't really now his own his he claimed that during this time period he he did a sweater girl act and other kinds of cross-dressing entertainment. He specifically named a club in New York City called the El Morocco,
Mm-hmm.
and he said he also uh, did this act at other clubs in quote upstate New York. Now,
Mm-hmm.
of course, in that time, upstate New York could be anything north of New York City. It could have been Poughkeepsie itself, because really, especially then, New York State was sort of like New York City
Mm-hmm.
and everything else.
Right.
Um, so in my book, while I don't have any evidence as to where he may have played, I do provide a whole bunch of information on the adult nightclubs that existed in upstate New York at that time. So it's the kinds of places he might have appeared at.
Okay.
And I have information about the El Morocco in Manhattan. All their Manhattan actually had quite a few what we'd say transgender clubs
Mm-hmm.
back then.
Yeah.
Um, and they were all associated with the mafia. That was the only way they actually operated, because they needed the protection of the mafia to pay off any crooked local police and
Mm-hmm.
politicians, so they wouldn't get harassed into non-existence.
Yeah.
Um, and that actually sort of brings up one interesting point of Ed's time in Manhattan. Um, his first book, Black Lace Drags, aka Killer in Drag,
Mm-hmm.
the the idea of this cross-dressing hitman.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Genovese crime family who ran the El Morocco had two cross-dressing hitmen. So I'm starting.
Wow.
I'm thinking that's more than a coincidence.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting.
That not that Eddie necessarily met them, right,
Yeah.
at the club, but that he had certainly heard of them, and maybe that's the seed idea for the
Yeah.
cross-dressing hitman that we then see later in his fiction.
Yeah. I find it fascinating though, is like that there's no record of kind of what he did because I mean it seems like the whole thing of just cross-dressing isn't enough to carry a show. I mean, did he sing or announce or recite or play an instrument or what did he do? I mean, it couldn't just
So
be the cross-dressing was it, but maybe it was. I don't know. This is a long
uh,
time ago, so
I would guess at the time he must have been fairly personable. The Dell's nightclub in Poughkeepsie was actually a fairly it wasn't a rinky-dink place.
hmm
It attracted national talent.
Okay.
So for them to have had Ed host their New Year's Eve show, even though we don't know any details,
hmm
tells me that he must have he must have been not just competent,
Okay.
you know,
Okay.
he must have been an assured figure on stage.
Okay. All right.
Uh,
Now, let's see. The two books you have, so the second one goes through like the beginnings of his film career. Is that what you said?
yeah,
Or
so
so
yeah,
where does it kind of end up, I guess, is what I'm kind of
so
curious about.
it takes us through 1948, when Ed in Ed arrives in Hollywood. I'm going to say sometime around mid-September 1947. We don't know the exact date, but that's my best um, guess at it based on what little evidence I could find. And um, in that period from September 47 through the end of 48, he makes some of his earliest contacts with people in Hollywood, both uh, cameramen like Ray Flynn, who later filmed some things for him, who was associated with Monogram. So Ed starts making some connections at Monogram
Hmm.
Pictures. He runs into other young, aspiring people like himself. Crawford John Thomas, who was a Los Angeles basin native who came into a little bit of an inheritance and uh, depending on whose version you want to trust, Ed either talked him into something or conned him out of his inheritance. In any event, they worked on a project together that ultimately failed and pretty much spoiled Crawford John Thomas on Hollywood. And he went off to a life of having nothing to do with Hollywood. Um, this was that summer of 48 is gosh, my brain is going today. I tell you, Mark, I've got to look something else up again
That's
because
okay. That's fine.
thank God I've got them sitting right here. Um, yeah, sorry. Summer of 48 is when he first came across Conrad Brooks and his brothers, who were
Hmm.
on a trip out from Baltimore. Um, One of Conrad's older brothers had more of the his two older brothers had more of a interest in Hollywood than Conrad did, and they waited till he got finished high school and conned him into going on this trip.
Hmm.
And uh, and there was a cafe that they would go to many mornings for breakfast, and they ran into Ed there, and that's when they first made contact. And of course, Ed, was already spinning some good tales about projects he wanted to do and everything. And while nothing happened right then, that was the start of Conrad coming back from Baltimore again a few years later and hooking back up with Ed and appearing in a number of his movies. The I think the probably the most interesting story Conrad told of those early meetings was at one point Ed said, "Well, hey, why don't we go up to my office and continue these conversations?"
Hmm.
And Ed's office was basically on the same block and just down a bit and around the corner. And at one point, he excused himself and came back in drag. And Conrad and his brother thought Ed was about to put a show on for them, thinking, this is Hollywood and he's gonna do some act. And it was like, no, no, he was just relaxing.
Hmm.
So that was sort of their introduction to this other side of Eddie,
Okay.
um, which
Mm.
he did not um, hide at all from people by all
Okay.
accounts.
Well, we're starting to run a little bit short on time.
Okay.
But I will ask two quick questions. Well, one quick question, then we'll kind of wrap it up with you promoting your own things. But uh, is this where you're leaving the Ed Wood story at this point, or are you planning future volumes?
Well, this is where I'm leaving the Ed Wood story for now.
Uh-huh.
I've got two other books in the works.
Hmm.
One that's not Ed related at all. So I'm working on an illustrated history of adult carnival themed novels from the 1930s to 1980s.
Mm.
And then I'm working on a biography of the main cameraman that filmed a lot of Ed's classic movies like Plan 9, William C. Thompson,
Hmm.
who not a lot of attention has been paid to. And yet he had a very storied career starting in silent film
Hmm.
and coming up through his work with Eddie and a little bit beyond. So I had come across quite a bit of information on him and a lot of previously unseen photos. So I thought Bill deserved a book, considering everybody sees his work when they watch Ed Wood's movies.
Hmm. All right. So I guess we have like about 3 minutes to go. So I would say tell us where we can get your books and who's the publisher, and if you're making any personal appearances in the next few months.
Okay, well, yeah, I'll go backwards.
And
No,
the
I'm not.
names of the books too.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm not making any personal appearances. The books are available on Amazon.
Mhm.
Um, and again, I'm gonna let's see if we unblur the background if I can actually show them
All right.
successfully.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah.
Here's the first one, The Unknown War of Edward D. Wood Jr., 42 to 46.
Hmm.
And the second one is The Muddle Years of Ed Wood Jr., 46 to 48.
Perfect. Okay.
Available at an Amazon website near you.
All right. And let's see. You didn't say you were going to make any personal appearances, but and you talked about your future projects, but I guess we'll leave it and then I'll wrap it up completely. Was there any one thing that you were happy to discover in your deep dives in Ed Wood's life?
Oh man, that's a good question. Um, I guess after the World War II book ended up being demolishing a bunch of myths about Ed.
Hmm.
The follow-up book, the I think the part that I enjoyed about it most was that the stories from this uncertain period, there was more truth to them.
Mm,
Um, it was still a mix of claims that Ed made of things he did do and things I can demonstrate he clearly didn't do, but there was some more factuality about this period of his life, little hints that we'd gotten over the years. So I think that was what I enjoyed the most. That and actually see the one thing I didn't mention was that when he was at the Kingsmith School for Creative Arts in DC, um, one of his main instructors went on to win multiple Pulitzer Prizes. So at this critical point in his life, the little dramatic instruction was actually from people who were very well trained and on their own arcs to success. So he did actually brush shoulders uh, with some great people at that point early in their careers.
very cool. Okay, well, wish you great success with those books. And I want to thank you again, Jim Pontolillo, for being my special guest on today's Fun Ideas podcast. And this is your host, Mark Arnold, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Mark. It was great.
Thank you.